if you deeply investigate into where any of your expressions come from, if you really look into any given expression of, especially in the realm of like opinion and belief and things like that, but really you can do this with anything that comes out of you. And if you just deeply investigate of where that comes from, then you find that so much, almost everything that you express comes from some kind of conditioning. And it kind of has to be that way. And I'm not saying that it's a bad thing at all. And I'm not even saying anything needs to change. But to know this and have this awareness that almost everything that we express is from a program. It's from a past experience that we have had or repeated, almost like being fed information or being fed knowledge, some kind of pattern of learned behavior. And we realize how much comes from our childhood, of course, from how we were raised, comes from traumas and wounds, desires, and all these things. So if we look and investigate anything, try it and look into anything that you end up expressing, any opinion that you have, any belief that you have, really anything at all, because so much just comes out of us that we don't realize. We don't realize that it's happening. And this brings us into the realm of karma and samskara. Samskaras are like the energy or the memories imprinted onto our being. And it's really our samskaras are really like what the way that we use the word karma is really more about our samskaras, because karma just means action, and it could be any action. It doesn't necessarily mean the thing that we've put onto the word, necessarily. But samskara is very much that. It's memory imprints that create patterns of thought and experience in our life. They go together. When we have thought patterns, it reflects directly in the world that we experience, and we have these looping energies around our life of the way that we act and the way that the world gives us life experience. And this is really like the root of suffering. The root of suffering is in duality, is in separateness, in a perception of duality, but that's a whole nother conversation. But one of the most important things to discuss as well is our perception. Being dualistic or non-dualistic has a lot to do with our happiness, our spiritual growth, our ability to see things for what they truly are, even just on a human level. If we unify our perception and expand it beyond our localized position of perceiving, meaning just our individual perception, if we pull out beyond that, then we're closer to truth, and we're able to see things more closely to what they actually are than just what I see it as from this point of view. Just as a quick example, if I see, if I see the backside of a horse, and that's the only experience that I have of a horse is the backside of the horse, that's my limited perception of what a horse is. But if I walk around it, if I get underneath it, if I go over the top of it, the more vantage points that I have of perceiving the horse, the closer to truth I get about what the horse is. And then if I observe its behavior, watch how it acts, and then I see another horse and watch how it acts, then I've really pulled back and taken the time to really get to know something, as opposed to like looking at the backside and saying, that's what a horse is, it's an ass, and it poops, whatever it is, forgive me. But that's just an example of that kind of a thing. So what I want to bring in, or what inspired me to throw the camera on today, is to investigate our ways of thinking, investigate our ways of perceiving, our ways of expressing, especially to bring everything inward, to discover and find out where our expressions, where our actions, where our thoughts are coming from. Because we believe right now, even innately, without thinking about it, there's an innate, because it's part of the programming, there's an innate sense of self with the way that we express, or the way that we speak, the way that we think, the way that we feel. But none of this is actually a who. When we go into this, and that's part of the intention behind doing this kind of inquiry, is when we go into these things and we try to find a self based on how we express ourselves, how we think, how we feel, all these things, we realize that these are just functions that are happening, that we're witnessing. We realize that there's actually this collection of behavior and emotion, feeling, expression, thought, all this stuff, this collection of all these things. There's not actually a person there. These are qualities of programmed energies or stuck energies and things like that. And also just qualities of the vessel that the self expresses itself through, if that makes sense. But to get to an actual being, we have to go beyond, because all the stuff that makes up, that makes up the body consciousness is still there when the body is dead. There's a power source that gets cut out when the body dies, when there's no more life in the body. So this is a really valuable thing to look at, is the moment of death. All the organs are there, all the cells are there, the brain, everything is there. But what's the thing that comes out of it that makes it no longer alive? Life itself, life force, or spirit, soul, whatever you want to say with that. So if we look at that, what is animating the body that makes it possible for expression to even happen, right? It could be said that the specific ways, that expression comes through are due to how the vessel is built. The vessel meaning the body and the brain, right? So if we look at it this way, if we took out all the programming, if we took out all the memories, but there was still an animated self, an animated vessel, being, human organism. If we took out all the memories, all the samskaras, no more karma, if we took out everything, but there was still life in the body, it would still be an individual expression. And that's because of the design, or the way that this body, this organism, is put together. And then there's influence with astrology and all that kind of stuff too. We can go further into this many ways, but so this is important to acknowledge. But the actual self, the actual who, that's involved with this. The deeper we go in, the deepest that we can go. If we just don't stop the investigation, just keep going, never satisfied with finding something. So you'll find things all down the tunnel into the truth. But don't be satisfied until you definitely get to the end, when there's nothing left. When all this stuff, you realize this, you realize that, just keep going into the abyss of being. Keep investigating. Who am I? Because when you find this essence beyond the programming, beyond the thinking, beyond the feeling, when you find the perceiver, of all that happens in life, then what you can confirm in when you arrive, or when everything else is gone and you can finally experience yourself, your actual self, then what you realize is a sense of self is actually there, because we can confirm that when we're identifying with all the other stuff, the mind stuff, the thoughts, the expressions, and when we're identifying with that, there's a sense of lack, or something's missing from my life. There's a sense of I have to get something. I have to become something. There's a sense of I have to find myself, because that's true. Because what we're identifying with is not an actual self. So there's innately within that, and we can prove this with our life. Innately within that is the sense of the need to discover something, to discover who I am. It's because who I'm identifying with is not who I am, and it knows that. All the programs even know that, but there's just no acknowledgement of this, that this is happening. So this is what we're trying to do, is bring acknowledgement to what's actually going on, the truth of what's actually going on with life itself, and especially how we experience it through the human. So when we go when the going is the mind going, I'll get to that in a second, but when we're actually existing as our true being, as our true self, there is a confirmed sense of this is who I am. And there's flashes of this along the way, and I'll get into that in a moment too, but there's a moment of certainty, of sureness, of knowing. When everything else gets put aside, when all the false identifications are gone, when we're empty, then there's a sense of sureness, of certainty. Because we're actually abiding only in ourself. It's like we've uncovered everything. We've taken everything off. And then we're just here. So if you want to join me right now, we can explore this a little and see if we can confirm it in the moment. So we have a little information on what we're not. We know that we're not anything that's being witnessed, right? This is like such a vital, kind of like a pointing out of anything that shows up. Even the feelings, when we're there, when we're only existing as ourself, even the feelings of peace and blissfulness that come along with that, of truth, of sureness, of certainty, those are also witnessed and are not to be identified with. That's a really, really important detail. It's a deep detail. I don't want to get too crazy with the focus of it. Really, what I really want to maybe steer us towards right now in this moment is to empty everything out, to take out all the tendencies of identifying with my life that I've experienced thus far. I'm gonna put aside my whole life story, everything that's happened, my age, my gender, putting everything aside, all the experiences that have ever happened to me, anything that ever will happen in the future, putting aside all the habits and tendencies of thought. Everything. We're going to totally take the mind out of the realm of identity. And then what's left here? This perceiving. We know that the body is here. We know that there is a localized perception, meaning we didn't get rid of anything and then all of a sudden we're seeing with 1,000 eyes. You know, it's not quite like that at the moment, but we are here. There is awareness. Are you with me? And it's okay if things arise. It's okay if thoughts come up, if there's a pull back into identifying with thought, if there's questioning, if there's doubt. Just watch. Just stay here with me in this moment and just watch it all happen. Disconnect. Pull the power source from the mind. It's almost like the mind has like a battery supply in a way, right? When you enter presence, it's like pulling the plug. When you enter presence, when you enter true being, when you enter a state of true presence, of as close to thoughtlessness as we can get. Thoughtlessness would be fully cutting the power, you know. But our thoughts have so much momentum that, you know, we'll like pull the plug for a second and then plug it right back in. It's like pretty instant. But if we stay here in presence, and then even as thoughts arise, we keep ourselves anchored in the present moment, right here, empty. No investment into the thoughts at this point. Then we can just be here. And then we'll notice a residual, but the power does start to dissolve after a while until we're interested again and we plug back in. Every time we're interested in a thought and we go into something, we absorb into thinking, into the mind, we're plugging the power source back in. Right? So this is a matter of keeping that there, staying here, and keep unplugging it. If you got to do it 1,000 times a minute, it's good. Eventually the unplugging becomes a habit, and then the amount of time we leave that cord out of the power supply extends, it expands, it gets longer. We visit it more often, you know, and we just keep going with that. Now, here, I hope this offers enough to make sure that we go to the right place. Make sure we exist as the right place. Just remember this. A good use of the memory here. Anything that I witness cannot be who I am. Because this is the thing, is we want to experience ourselves with the mind. But that's impossible. We want to have a grand enlightening experience of self. You know, and it may be like that. But really what that is the dissolving of the false identity. A blissful experience happens from that. Just like we were saying, it's like identifying with one thing, and then when we stop doing that, we remove the habit of identifying with what we're not, and then we put all aside, we enter presence, we actually experience true being, true self. And then from that comes bliss, and then the mind will take that bliss and run with it and say this happened, and then it'll claim it as its own, and it'll be a whole thing. But just stay here. Just stay here. And any doubts that come through, any yeah, but feelings, just let them be, let them dissolve. Just trust and stay here. As this. Okay? And you can stay here and then carry on with your life. in the beginning, it's probably good to do it in some kind of quiet setting, where you can really, where there's not too much stimulation that'll feed the mind, or feed the interest. But ultimately, you can do this all the time. You can stay in this presence all the time, and there will still be functioning. There's still action. There's still karma going on. There's still samskara, playing itself out. But it's almost like I've had this experience before where releasing something heavy, it's like you have this lump of mud on your head, right? And then you enter true being, and it just dries up and just plops off, when we release a major identity, and then we feel light and we feel bliss and happy. So from this place, as you move on in your meditations, and even now in this moment, just staying here, noticing what the mind is doing, noticing the mind moving, but not feeding it. You can really confirm this as yourself. This I know for certain is who I am. I know for sure that I am not the functions of my mind. I am not the movements of this body or expressions of it. They're happening through. I am what illuminates all that. I am the life in this body itself, purely, infinitely, eternally. The eternal life of all beings. Now, the investigation that we started with, the inquiry into where my expressions come from. There's like a few ways that we can kind of steer our attention and awareness back home, sort of. So I, as a self, am pure eternal being and purely present all the time, always, no matter what. But there's a quality, there's an aspect that moves, the sense of existing. The sense of existing is something that is also witnessed. The sense of I exist is something that is witnessed. And that has the tendency, that I is also can stand for interest. So that has the interest that moves in and out of things, that goes in. And then it gets caught up, and that's the thing that needs to return home, ultimately to dissolve, and then we're in presence. But that's what's doing the investigating. And the point of the investigation is to trail our way back home. Right? So this is something that's important, is not to identify with what is investigating and what is coming. Because the idea of this practice kind of is to bring ourselves close enough to truth, or to bring the investigator, to bring the mind close enough to the truth so that it dissolves, and then we can be as ourselves purely. There's a few different ways that we can do this. This is just one way of attaining this. We can attain, I'll get to some other ways in a little bit, maybe soon, but just to stay with this aspect of inquiry, this aspect of questioning is really so potent and so powerful, because, and I feel essential to really complete this this kind of reconfiguring of sense of self. Because when we question something, we instantly aren't identifying with it. We instantly prove that we're not identified with it, sort of. Or at least we create space for that to be available. If I question my mind and my thinking, my way of thinking, already something really grand happens just in the inquiry itself. Who is this that's thinking? What's happening? Where do these thoughts come from? And what's cool about that is there's thought in the surface or feeling or emotion or something like that. That's what's in the front. That's what's like directly being perceived in the moment. Just a given thought and a feeling with that, a story, a whole imagined thing. That's like what's on the top, on the surface. But as soon as I say, where did that come from? I already start going in. I already start driving my attention in. And that's already a beautiful thing, because oftentimes it's the opposite. The mind itself wants to go out. It wants to go out and explore the world. It wants to investigate what's going on in the world. It wants to point its fingers. It wants to praise. It wants to blame. It wants to do all this stuff out there. But this inquiry of, where do my thoughts come from? Are my thoughts who I am? Is this guy in front of me wrong about this? And am I my thoughts? Let me find out yourself for sure first. That's the most important thing. To know for certain yourself. So this is so valuable, because we engage and initiate an inward inquiry. It's the only way to go home. And by going home, I mean the mind going back to its source. This is really what we're doing. We're steering the mind back to the source of where it came from. Right? And the deeper the inquiry, the further back we go, the more open we can experience life. And the essence of our true being is truth itself, is knowledge itself. It's where knowledge comes from. It's where information comes from. It's where creation comes from. It's life itself. And imagine what that might feel like, even as a mind. So there are some other ways that we can find our way, so the mind can find its way to self, truth. This inquiry, what I have found is the most potent for me. And this is where, practices like yoga and meditation and chanting and stuff like that, they offer us this space. They offer us this space, especially things like chanting are so one of the best tools for bringing the mind right next to self, right next to spirit. And then with the right amount of devotion. So a vital aspect of this, because a devoted mind will go all the way. A purely devoted mind, the deeper the devotion is ingrained, even if it's as a new program, the deeper devotion to God, devotion to truth, devotion to love, the deeper that is, the more firm that is within, will really fuel the depth of our journey. So we have to be so committed to this to go all the way. And the reason for that is because it's the mind itself that's going to create the doubts along the way as we travel on our journey, on our path to truth, to God, to spirit. whatever you want to call it. It's the mind that's going to create all these blocks to getting through. It's going to create all these doubts, these new concepts, these new ideas, these expressions outwardly at others that will bind us to that will keep our attention driving towards things that aren't of service to our purpose, or aren't of service to our journey, our awakening. It's the mind that's going to do that. But if we can work on developing a diligence with the mind, and again, a devotion towards the goal, which is pure divinity, pure truth, if we can really instill that in the mind, then our chances for really going all the way, and also it really like streamlines the path too. The deeper the devotion that we have clears the path, you know, because it instantly, because we won't go into these other ways of thinking that keep us from going all the way. And there's so many things that can get in the way of this, you know. Something that I experienced directly is like I really even like my own teachers and my own knowledge base that I have were things that got in the way. You know, things that provided such medicine for me became distractions. Things that healed me to a certain degree, healed the mind to a certain degree, and offered so much, actually created attachments to those things and put me in division with a different type of way. This is incredibly important to look at as well, right? Because remember, the perception of truth is universal and non-dual. It's one. It's like the horse analogy, kind of, where we can see it from all angles and appreciate the reality of things. We can understand that everything has context to it. Everything in the realm of thought, in the realm of belief and expression has context to it. And where in truth we realize that there is a context to everything. You know, because something that the mind does is it'll take its specific point of reference, and then it'll notice a different point of reference, and without understanding the context of this, it'll project onto it something to like prove it wrong, so it can maintain its firmness and its grip on its localized perception, and it'll try and diminish this other thing that opposes it: an opinion and somebody else's opinion, a belief and somebody else's belief, a religion and another religion. This happens all over the place. This is something that is proof and evidence that we're not really confirmed and fixed in pure truth. We might be close to it, you know, but this is one thing that the mind will take, and it can hold on to that for a while. It's very, very convincing because, you know, because it'll seem so real, it'll seem so true, because of the contextual thing. If we try to negate something and we don't know the full context of it, then it's easy to do that. It's easy for me to look at a surface level of an opinion or a belief, to look at the surface of it and say, it's this and this is wrong. You know, it's easy to stand in front of the horse and talk about its eyes and its nose, and then someone's standing behind it, and I can say what they're saying is wrong. Right? They're saying it's round and it's got a tail and all this stuff. That's wrong. From my position, that's true. From their position, that's true. Right? But that's because neither of us are looking at the whole of either of whatever it is. Right? So that's important, you know, to really look at. And anybody who's gone into multiple, really deeply, like scholars and things like that, of multiple traditions, often come out with the similarities of them. What they come through with is the common ground that they stood on. And this is good for us to focus on. what's consistent, what is pure, what unifies. So we can say there's quality, the quality of the mind. This is a great conversation too. The quality of the mind, the functioning of the mind is in separation. It's in duality. It has to function that way to maintain the survival of the body. It has to separate forms so that this body stays healthy and well. It has to do that. It's functioning. It's the only way it exists, only way it can exist. The spirit, the truth, divinity is universal and one, permeates through all of creation. The life of all existence is one. So we can say that an expression coming from that source of all would be an expression of unity. It could only do that. And then the mind itself can only express in a duality. So there's like a conundrum here, is because the spirit, the true essence, has to pass through the mind, thought, language, and all that to be presented at all, to be expressed at all. So how does that happen? It's this kind of beautiful irony. You know, my destiny is to discover the truth, and then once it's there, I only have a limited vessel for expressing that. But it's kind of a fun thing. But just in this realm of paying attention to the expressions, investigating the expression, I can say, if my expression separates, creates division, right? Because division, separateness is an illusion, right? It's the limited perceiving of the world and existence. It's a limited perspective of that that's directly experienced, but ultimately unreal because it is limited. It's only a fraction of perceiving. And then as the essence of truth and spirit can clearly move through the vessel, it's unifying, right? So if we can look at this, and if I'm expressing somewhere in the mood of separation, then there's a good place for my investigation. There's a good place for my investigation to look into that. Because somewhere you will find somewhere inside, there's like some kind of like wound or something like that. There's some kind of like trauma. I'm using the word traumatic. It doesn't have to be something absolutely horrible. Trauma has a scale, you know. It can be just a small moment. It could be a big moment, but it could be a small little thing where you were hurt somewhere, you know. And that's the expression of creating that duality, to protect that hurt part of you so that it doesn't happen again. That's how the mind functions, you know. We don't want to function in every way from this place. So we could go on and about all this stuff, but some gems here maybe are the idea even of investigating my own thoughts and expressions, where they come from, right? Can help me confirm in knowing that I am not my mind and will no longer identify with my mind, with the mind that I witness. I know for sure I cannot be my mind because I am perceiving it. I am seeing it. So it cannot be who I am. Impossible. I know this for sure. I know that the more my mind becomes devoted to God, to truth, to the goal of awakening, to living purely in the truth of existence, to awakening to the true spirit, to being my true self all the time, and only identifying with that. The more devoted I am to that, And there's so many different channels to do that. We can get into that on another day. And to know that if my expressions are dualistic, that's a cue for my investigation. If I'm expressing in a way that separates me from another, then I know it's coming from the mind. I know that I'm identifying with the mind. And I can steer that inquiry in, not even to discover where it came from or what it is that may happen, but simply to bring me home. Simply to bring me back to my truth, to the realization of my truth. I'm in separate consciousness. Where does that come from? Who am I? I know that's not who I am, but I am identifying in this moment. It instantly returns back home. Spend as much time as you can empty. Because in emptiness is the fullness of God. In emptiness, there's certainty. In emptiness, there's the purest truth. So as often as possible, reside in the emptiness. And who am I talking to right now? The part of us that is interested in the mind. Shift the interest to the self, to the emptiness, to that pure essence that's beyond description. If the mind only exists in duality and separation, it can't even fathom unity. It can't even fathom oneness. So the only way to know anything about truth or oneness or divinity or God or spirit, the only way to actually know for sure is to be spirit, to be truth. Because the mind simply can't fathom it. It's not designed to do so at this time. Maybe it's unraveling to that, but as of now, so what that means is we have to fully, like we were saying earlier, disconnect from the mind. And again, that doesn't mean we stop witnessing the mind. It simply means that part of us that is interested, that attention that moves, is no longer interested in what the mind is doing, or it no longer loses itself in the realm of mind. Let it lose itself in the realm of the divine, in the spirit that's inside the heart. Shift the interest, shift the attention, shift the lure, the draw, the desire. Take all the desires from the world that we might have in the world. Shift them all to know the truth, to know God, to know myself. Take everything and pack it all into this one desire and drive it home. The deeper we can be devoted to that, to know God, that can be the power that we need to be pure, to be purely our divine self and being. Thank you for joining me, for witnessing this talk the more it's said that this is our destiny, that this is, let's see, hold on. Bear with me a moment. So those, I'm paraphrasing from the Upanishads. This is actually from the Rig Veda, this quote. Well, it's a interpretation of a quote from the Rig Veda. This is from the Rig. 2 birds of beautiful plumage, comrades, inseparable, live on the self-same tree. 1 bird eats the fruit of pleasure and pain. The other looks on without eating. So what this is talking about the pure observer, and then that part of us that we call self. It's a sense of being. That's why we call it ourselves. It's not really fully, completely. When it is pure, it feels good. That we can purify. That interested self, that first I exist expression can be purified, but it's not ultimate. It's still awesome. But that aspect is kind of represented by the bird that goes out to pleasure and pain and is like in that realm, but the other looks on without eating. It is peaceful. The person that enjoys the fruits of life is often the one being held up for praise. We often glorify those who do really well materially, who make a lot of money and have a glorified life. But I mean, we know at this point, we know now, we've experienced enough testimony. We've heard enough stories that the richest people in the world are miserable. And why? It's because they're going out into that realm that has no actual joy in it. It's because that attention and interest is meant to go inside. It's destined to. And that's the reason we go out in the world and we get tired of it. We go out in the world and that's why suffering exists. We go out into the world and we fulfill all of our desires. We become everything that we think we should be. But at the end of it, we're still unfulfilled and still suffering. That's because that sense is meant and destined to go back into its source, to go home. He or she who is not hypnotized by the ever-changing stream of phenomenon, but observes it in detachment, is heading for the supreme human destiny. So here, saying that the ultimate greatest thing that we can do with our life is to discover ourself, discover our truth. It makes sense. And it makes sense because everything else that we could ever want in the world, everything else that could ever be pleasurable in the world is heightened when we're actually in our truth. When we actually live from this divine truth, then every other aspect of life is supported, is enhanced, and we find a greater joy in everything that we do. Even if we lie about something, for example, to get ourselves out of, trouble that festers inside. Because untruth, this is like how life is designed. Untruth is unpleasant. Even if there's a moment of satisfaction, I got away with it, it'll burn you inside. It'll rot you from the inside. and creates so much suffering. But the good thing is, what is rotting will die off. And eventually, again, you don't have to wait until you get fed up with life to do this. Oftentimes, that's what creates the depth of devotion that's necessary to go all the way, is to have such an aversion, a repulsion for all of life, even the most pleasing and enjoyable things. When you suffer enough, none of it will be appetizing anymore. The only thing that will draw your attention is the divine self, is God. But we don't have to wait till we suffer for that to happen. We don't have to. We can develop this deep devotion now, to whatever degree, and try, go into it. It's worth it. It's worth it. What is awaiting is an unfathomable joy. So you can try and go there and get a glimpse of it. It's the same thing can happen. As an example, the first time we taste sugar or sweetness, honey, or something like that. We taste it, and then that's there in our memory. Even the mind, the mind plugs that in. New program beginning. Sweetness is good. Get more. And we'll seek more of that as we go, because this is the way that the mind functions. When we go into devotion, if we explore bhakti yoga and the bliss of devotion to God, and we absorb, there's a joy there that is beyond any material pleasure. And then we can take that all the way home. So everything is burned off that doesn't serve this ultimate goal and essence and purpose and destiny of being pure in identity, of knowing ourself, of knowing our truth. The highest knowledge that there could be. And it's because it's the only real knowledge. It is the source of knowledge itself. Everything else is an expression of it. What we're getting to is the very source and origin of all life that we have inside. That is inside. It has to be that way. It's here. It's here. So, to know that right now, there are aspects that we are identified with that are not real, and to drive those home. For those aspects that are still firmly identified with something that's not actually truly who we are. Take that and drive that into the truth. This seed of all that I care about, all that I want, the only desire I have is for truth. Is for love, is for God. And whatever that means. Let that propel you every moment, every day. Because like we talked about in the beginning, otherwise, where do our expressions come from? Let all of your expressions come from this single desire for God, for truth, for love. And then allow all of your expressions to come from there. And this will push out all the other stuff. It'll push it all out. Because again, the alternative is operating on traumatic experiences, believing in a lie, believing in something that you're not, concepts that have been constructed and influenced and superimposed on us from our parents and from others and from society, all these conditions. We want to function and express from what is real and what is true, fully, completely, ultimately. That's where joy is. That's where happiness is. Happiness isn't becoming something that you imagine to be great. By the time we attain what we imagine, we get there, and it's rarely what we thought, even what we thought, if ever. And we definitely won't be satisfied, because the only true satisfaction is in this self-discovery, is in commitment and devotion to the divine. That's the only place where true satisfaction, where true purpose is. Where we find ourselves, where we know actually what we are here to do on this earth. In a grand sense, this will come clear. And in a moment-to-moment sense, we have a guidance from the source of creation itself, from infinite intelligence, from infinite being, from infinite manifestation. Om Namah Shivaya. Hare Krishna. Jai Jai Radhe. Jai Shri Rama. Jai Sita Ram. Jai Hanuman. Praise Allah. Praise Jesus Christ. All glories to God. As a mind, thank you for this moment to share. Thank you for this body. To offer the grace that has permeated my life, that has healed my mind. That has destroyed my habits of suffering and continues to cleanse. Thank you, God, for everything. Om, peace, amen.